All right. Today we're going to be talking about the 49th World Communications Day, which happened in 2015. This was the second World Communications Day of Pope Francis being Pope, and we're going to talk about his message during that Communications Day. One of the things, the theme of the whole message was about the family. And so one of the things that he said was that we first learn to communicate in the family. And isn't that the truth? For good or for ill, right? We learn how to communicate in the family, and we learn from different people in our families. We may have some elders who are very talkative. You might have some elders that don't talk very much at all. You may have some that when they get upset, they give you the silent treatment, or maybe when they get upset, they yell, So it's like, absolutely, between the ages of 0 and 5, especially, we develop our personality, and that's often based on how we're conditioned as children. And that conditioning, although some of it's through behavior, actions, a lot of it is through communication or the lack thereof. And so that makes total sense. And it's not that I didn't know that, but certainly needed to hear it again when Pope Francis said that in this message. Communication is intertwined with the language of the body. Yeah, so it's not just the words, right? We communicate non-verbally as well. And whether that we hope that's not through abuse or violence, but everything is a form of communication, all of our actions as well. And so if you ask me a really important question and I turn around and leave, I'm communicating. I hope I don't do that. But if you ask me a question and my face gets really red and my eyebrows go up, or, there are lots of things. People sometimes shake their finger in your face when they're talking to you. There's all kinds of nonverbal communication, and it all means something. I'm not an expert on it, but there are people who are probably assessing me on this video. I'm not happy with that, but even the direction you look when you're thinking means you're making it up versus trying to remember, so all kinds of body language intertwined in these messages. And, children that have been neglected, the body language may be all they get, first of all, but definitely if they're in families that are maybe not very affectionate or whatever, there's all kinds of messages that people receive about themselves, whether it's true or false. Your worth is inherent, as a child of God, as being made in the image of God, and it's not dependent upon how you were treated as a child, but that's how we're conditioned. We're conditioned to believe our worth has to do with how we were treated as a child, whether that's through communication or actions or nonverbal communication and all of that. So worth paying attention to, worth thinking about. The womb is the first school of communication, because that's where this Pope Francis said. The womb is the first school of communication where we become familiarized with the outside world in the safety of our mother's womb. Not all children in the womb are safe, of course, from outside influences, but we hope and pray that they are. But let's say that you are in a safe womb. You are hearing your mother's voice. You're hearing the voice of the people outside the womb. I don't remember, but I'm assuming you're hearing music. You're hearing, you're feeling the feelings probably of your mother, all that. But this idea that the womb was the first school of communication was powerful to me, because I happen to work in a school of communication. So thinking about it being a womb, metaphorically, and then thinking about the womb being a school, very interesting kind of things that have gone through my head with this, where we learn, where we're being taught. We're being taught even before we technically come into this life, right, world through the birth canal, we're being schooled. We're being schooled about communication. I know that there are people who play certain music, uh, to their infant in the womb to maybe help them become geniuses and all of that. I again, not an expert in that, but just a very interesting thought that it's not. It's like not even 0 through 5. It's like minus something, minus 0.9 or something. I don't know. The family is where we learn to live with others despite differences, or we don't, right? We hope that we live in a family that where people can have differences and express those differences and it be okay. Whether it's okay or not, that is where you learn to deal with it. And whether the learning that you do is to suppress your own voice or whether the learning is that your voice is accepted, whatever that learning is, it happens in the family. And we don't choose our family. I think many of us are blessed by our families, but we feel like we don't get to choose our families. Maybe we do. I don't know. We'll find out someday, hopefully. But most families aren't always on the same page, although many can be. You can come from a community that's very similar and has a lot of similar beliefs, but usually there's going to be somebody who feels differently, has a different perspective, and you may not agree with that person. And I think when you're a child, you listen, and most of us, I think some children are very rebellious, right? But most children are trying to please their parents, their grandparents, their whole families, older siblings maybe. And so under those circumstances, the way that you learn to live with the differences may just be to accept them as they are. And then as you get older and develop your own sense of self, then you may deal with those differences differently. Um, but it is true. This is where we learn it. And I think that going back in time and assessing and thinking about how you were trained in your communication within your family might bring up some insights that make a lot of sense to how you're dealing with people in your life today, whether it's at work or at school or wherever you are. Could be very insightful. The family is the model for all communication. Every single bit of it, yeah. When I was young, people used to write letters, and my mother and grandmother wrote letters to one another because we lived pretty far away, and long distance phone calls seemed expensive, and so there are different types of communication there. The written word. My mother's a reader, so she read a lot, and communication through that kind of written word as well was modeled in my home. Um, and then, there are situations where people aren't getting along and they are arguing, and maybe they're slamming doors or whatever it is that's going on. Positive communication is being modeled. Neutral communications being modeled. Negative communications being modeled. It's all being modeled there in the family, I will go to say that it's not just the womb, that was our first school, but the family, I guess, is our second school. Our immediate family is our second school. Our extended family might be a school after that. Most basic form of communication is prayer. And so Pope Francis was saying that that all communication is modeled in the home, and one of the most basic forms that's usually modeled for us is prayer. Now, whether you came from a home where people prayed or not, I know not all homes have people who pray, but many of us were raised to pray before we ate dinner or pray before we went to sleep or prayed in church or whatever. But teaching children to pray is one of the most basic forms of communication that we learn as children. And sometimes it's a prayer that we repeat, just now I lay me down to sleep, or, whatever the prayer is. Or maybe we learned the Lord's Prayer in the Bible. But definitely prayer is a form of communication between us and God, between us and other people in our communication with God. In the family, we learn the meaning of facial expressions and silence. We learn the meaning of silence. We learn the meaning of no words being spoken can be more meaningful than the words that are spoken. And I don't like the silent treatment. I don't like to give it. I don't like to get it. Some people are really good at it. Sometimes it's not even silent treatment. It's just silence. It's just people not having anything to say to each other. I know you can go have dinner or lunch at a restaurant, and there will usually always be some couple or some family sitting there. Everybody's on their phones. They're not talking to each other. They're eating, they're scrolling, whatever. And so the lack of desire to converse is meaningful. It means something. It means people didn't feel comfortable with it, or weren't accepted, or don't know each other well enough to talk, or don't care about each other enough to talk. I mean, whatever the reasons are. And then the meaning of facial expressions. And there are some people who have difficulty reading facial expressions or understanding them. And I'm sure that not everybody's facial expression means the same to everybody. And maybe I make a facial expression that means something to me when I make it, and then when you're on the receiving end of it, you think it means something different. So it's not a given that we understand what these things mean. And sometimes people don't ask. You might say something and I look funny, and then you go off and say, "Did you see that look she gave me?" You don't even know what it meant. We didn't have the discussion about it, but you thought it meant something, and took it to be communication, even though we may be misunderstanding each other, which is not technically my definition of communicating. But we learn all this in the family, what it means. And maybe what it meant in our family wasn't the same thing it meant in somebody else's family, and that can bring a lot of confusion. The meaning of communication is recognizing and creating closeness. Now, we know that not all communication brings closeness, but we've talked before about the words of Pope Francis, and he said that good communication brings us together, it brings closeness. And so I think what he means by this, or this may be a paraphrase of something he said, is that the purpose, the true God-given purpose of communication would be to bring us closer, is recognizing closeness, is creating closeness, is bringing us closer to one another in a positive way. And that's why we have it. We know in the story of the Tower of Babel, people weren't being able to communicate anymore, and it created chaos, and division. And so the true meaning of the fact that we have the ability, animals can communicate with each other. Animals can communicate with us, and we can communicate with animals. But as human beings, we created more complex languages to be able to, first off, survive, right? And then grow into, as Maslow says, more meaningful relationships and more meaning in our lives. And I think that this idea that the purpose of it is closeness makes us have to stop and think that we're misusing this God-given gift and tool almost every day, and a lot, right? If we're saying words that are causing division, then we're going against the meaning of communicating. We're doing the exact opposite of what communication was meant for. And that sounds like, separation. It sounds like sin, doesn't it? If we're communicating and not bringing closer, then we're doing the opposite of God's will with communication. And yeah, that's really something to think about. That's very powerful. When we grow closer and accept each other, we experience gratitude and joy. And I think that is true. I think that when we're causing chaos and division, we're certainly, you might have some kind of sick kind of recognition. What's the word? Validation from causing chaos. I don't know, but it's not going to be long. You're not going to enjoy it for very long. And you're not really enjoying it. Your ego might be gratified in some way, but you're not really enjoying it. Positive psychology teaches that it's the study of what creates human flourishing. Gratitude is one of those things that creates human flourishing, and relationships, positive relationships, create joy. There we have a human need. We're relational beings. We have a human need to relate to one another in a positive way, to experience joy. All this has been scientifically proven. And so when we grow closer and accept each other, we experience gratitude and joy, according to Pope Francis. And what the opposite of that would be when we do not accept each other and we grow further apart, we do not experience gratitude and joy. Not on the high side, the high level. Not true gratitude and true joy, in the heart, of the heart. And acceptance is a huge thing. It's difficult. And Pope Francis, we talked before about him saying it's not enough to tolerate. We have to accept one another. You may not really even understand why somebody does or thinks the way that they do, but you have to accept their right to think those things and accept them as they are without trying to fix and change them. And it's only in that situation where you can grow closer and experience joy. So very true. The church herself is the family of families. And so we are born into our immediate family, and then oftentimes into a larger community, an extended family, maybe a church, maybe a school, maybe a town, or whatever it is. And the church, capital C, the universal church of all those who are believers or in the body of Christ, are a part of the body of Christ. I think all children of God are a part, but we don't always draw close to that and to each other. But he said the church is the family of families. All of our families are within this family, and so we have learned within those tiny families to communicate with each other. And then now we're in this larger family of families where we have to deal with how we learn to communicate, hopefully in a positive way. And so growing closer within our own family, and then our family growing closer with other families within this larger family. Kind of hard to explain, but I think we know what we're talking about. In the family daily experience, we daily experience the limits of ourselves and others. Isn't that the truth? Limits. We've talked before about we have these autonomous complexes, and they're uncontrollable, and they're based on wounds that we've experienced probably through poor communication, whether it was verbal or nonverbal. And we have these wounds which created defense mechanisms, and when they get triggered, we automatically fight back and shoot back and say things maybe we regret or don't mean. Those are our limits. We're not all, well, I don't think any of us are born into this world 100% 100% godly, right? It's a struggle every day to try to take the mud off that has been caked on through the years. But those are our limits. When our buttons get pushed, when we push others' buttons, you know, we experience this most daily in the family. I think even at work, you know, with the people that you work with daily, you're going to experience everybody's limits and your own limits. And sometimes when maybe things are tough, you know, finances are limited and when we get squeezed and our buttons are more easily pushed, maybe we're tired, maybe we're sick, you know, whatever it is, we learn all of this from our daily experiences. And I don't know, I think in some situations, you know, just the fact that we do this every day with each other makes things difficult. It becomes mundane. And maybe we don't realize how much we appreciate somebody until they're not there anymore, or until we're scared they're not there anymore, or whatever, which is just kind of the human way, I think. But yeah, we experience our limits. Hopefully, we learn to navigate those limits, navigate our own limits, navigate the limits of others. Hopefully, we learn not to push the buttons or to heal our own triggers and to help others heal theirs. You know, that would be the goal. Do not fear imperfections, weakness, conflict. Deal with them constructively. Pope Francis is saying, I think, he's saying, when it happens, and it will happen often, that I accidentally punch one of your buttons and you go off on me, you know, or whatever, or vice versa. Don't be afraid of that. Don't fear it. Don't run and hide. Deal with it constructively. I've had some situations recently where I don't think I dealt with things very constructively at all. I suppose I dealt with them the way I had been conditioned to. But yeah, the thing would be to know that we're not perfect, to know that we do have our strengths, but we also have our weaknesses. We're not supposed to focus on the weaknesses. We're supposed to focus on the strengths, but we do have our weaknesses. And we do have our defense mechanisms, and this does create conflict, but to not fear it. We have, I have a lot of my student teams take the Four Tendencies quiz, Gretchen Rubin's Four Tendencies quiz, and it's rebel and obliger and questioner and upholder. And the majority, always the majority in the whole class, were all obligers. We want to please. And I think when we want to please and can't handle somebody being mad at us or whatever, that's a fear-based relationship, and that's not healthy. And so he's saying, do not fear. These things are going to happen. Don't fear them. Deal with them, and don't deal with them in a negative way. You know, don't try not to deal with them in a destructive way, but more in a constructive way. Let's build the bridges. But that's going to take dealing with it to build those bridges. It's going to take wanting to build those bridges. He said the family is also a school of forgiveness. We don't always forgive. We need to forgive. Forgiveness is something we do for ourselves because it's healthy. It's unhealthy to hold a grudge for your whole life, right? Somebody may have done something that was not okay, and to forgive them is not to say that it was okay. It's to say, I choose to let it go. I choose to, and if somebody's behavior is constantly unhealthy, you may choose not to be around them, but you still need to forgive them. You need to let it go. They say forgive and forget. I don't know if we ever forget, but we can try not to obsess over it every day of our lives. You know, we have to let it go. We have to accept them. That's who they are. I think most people are trying to do their best, and our best is not always good enough, but we're always in some ways trying to do our best. And so the idea that the family is this school, it's our first school of learning to forgive. And either we have good models or we don't. There are some people that are humble and really good at admitting faults and taking responsibility for their words and actions. And then there are others who are not. And I'm not sure which one, but we probably see the people who are not modeled more than the people who are. But hopefully we do at some point hear people say, I'm sorry, and see forgiveness in our families. It is possible to restore broken communication when contrition is expressed and accepted. Taking responsibility. In fact, this is the only way you can restore broken communication is if you say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that, or whatever. I had some people in my life who got into an argument and then refused to sit down and work through it. That's not contrition. That's saying, I don't want to hear you say you're sorry, and I'm not going to say I'm sorry, and or whatever. Or I don't expect you to say you're sorry, and I'm not going to say I'm sorry. So that's not contrition. That's not contrition expressed or accepted. And so that communication stays broken. It doesn't mean these people don't communicate, but their communication is not bridged. It's always got this wall that has been built, this divide, this might be kind of like a canyon, in between that echoes or something. That it is possible to restore. And I think that many of us have a hard time accepting responsibility for our words and actions. And we want to blame others, and some people want to only blame others and never blame themselves. And I think it just means that they were conditioned in a household where taking responsibility caused punishment, maybe severe punishment. Kind of like, I accidentally broke that vase, and when I told the truth about it, I got beaten, so I'm not going to tell the truth when I break a vase anymore because that was painful. I get that. I get that there are situations that create that kind of conditioning, and then somebody just grows up never taking responsibility and never having to take responsibility, never being forced to have consequences for their action because they refuse to admit their actions or admit that their actions or words were wrong. I get that exists, but communication is always going to be broken if you don't take responsibility for the things that you say and the things that you do, and to say I'm sorry when that is needed, and to heal that relationship. And if you're unwilling to say that, then you don't really want that relationship. That's your choice. But don't act like you do, because you don't, if you're not willing to say you're sorry. Teach children to listen, speak respectfully, express views without negating those of others. And then those children can become a force for dialogue, positive dialogue, open dialogue in society. And if we're living in a society, I'm just unwinding what Pope Francis said here. If we're living in a society where people don't listen and they don't speak respectfully and they don't express their own views without negating the views of others, then they're not getting taught they're getting taught not to do those things, right? In the family. It starts in the family and then works its way out into society. If we have a force for unhealthy dialogue in society, then it stems from what we're being taught and teaching in the family. And that gives me hope, because that means we can go and we can heal this within our immediate family lives, and then that will radiate outward. We don't have to, the answer's not to try to heal the whole of society, because that's probably impossible, but we can heal our immediate relationships by listening, speaking respectfully, being able to express our own views without saying the other person's views are bad or wrong or whatever, without getting negative about it, without getting hateful about it. And then that will radiate out into the world, and it's everybody's independent and unique responsibility to do this in their own life and around the people that they are relating to on a daily basis. And so this is the playbook. Listen, truly listen. Don't be thinking about what you're getting ready to say. Listen to what the other person is saying. Speak respectfully. Because when you're saying, you always do this and you always do that, I think the relationship counselors say, don't say always and never, because first of all, that's not true. It's not always, it's not never. And when you hear people say that, it's kind of just an exaggeration, and it does not lead to healing. Bless rather than curse. Visit rather than repel. Accept rather than fight. These things, according to Pope Francis, will break the spiral of evil. Not just the spiral of not communicating well, but the spiral of evil can be broken by blessing each other rather than cursing each other. And when we say cursing, could be saying bad words, but the negative energy that we're spewing out towards somebody else is like a curse that we're wishing upon them, right? If we bless them, we're sending a blessing. If we thank them, value them, that'll break the spiral of evil. Visiting rather than repelling, going and knocking on the door or whatever, not invasively, but visiting instead of pushing people away or driving people away or not allowing people into your life, whatever, having that attitude of conversation on the road, on a journey, as we talked about. Accept rather than fight. I thought that was interesting. Does that mean, in the wisdom of and intuition of Pope Francis, that the answer to not fighting is simply accepting one another? I think so. I think that's kind of a light bulb moment for me. You don't want to fight? Then accept. Accept people for who they are. Again, if they're being abusive, that doesn't mean you have to have them near you, but you do have to accept them. Otherwise, you're going to be trying to change them or fix them or control their behavior, which is going to lead to fighting. I mean, maybe all fighting is about, I'm trying to control your behavior. And if that's the case, then acceptance would be the answer, and it would break the spiral of evil. Educate children to fellowship with one another. And a lot of what Pope Francis said makes me think deeply. I don't run around thinking, oh, I need to teach students to fellowship with one another. I've been on research projects where one of the things that causes students to stay in school and to do well is their friendships, their peer friendships that they make within their own degree programs specifically, but just the friendships that they make in college, the healthy friendships they make in college, the ones that encourage them, the ones that help them have comfort there and want to do well, because everybody wants to do well. But I don't stop and go, oh, I need to teach them to fellowship. I know that I need to have avenues and to facilitate ways where they get to know each other. But then to take that a little step further and educate them to fellowship. I mean, I need to be educated on what fellowship means. I've never been very good at fellowship, I don't think. So, yeah, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. To fellowship is to enjoy one another's company, probably do something fun, not, I don't know what that would be. I don't know if that's karaoke or what that is, but some sort of way to get to know each other and to encourage one another. Not just get to know each other, but to encourage one another. Media, Pope Francis said, can hinder us by causing us to avoid listening to one another, to evade contacting one another, and by filling up every moment of our lives. And so we're on our phone, we're on social media, and we're scrolling at dinner instead of talking to the people around us. Then that's media filling up every moment of my day and causing me not to listen to the humans in person or even on my phone. Am I not FaceTiming with people or talking with people on my phone? Am I not texting even? Am I not emailing? Whatever. Am I not having a conversation? I'm not listening to people because I've filled up every moment and it's causing me to not have contact with each other. And so these are ways that media can hinder us. And I'm going to skip over. Media can help us by encouraging us to share our stories and to listen to the stories of others. Media can help us stay in contact. I, of course, know more about what's going on in people's lives because I'm connected with them on Facebook than I would know if I weren't. Hopefully, if I'm seeing positive things there. Media can help us find ways to thank each other, to seek forgiveness, to open doors to new encounters. And so media is just a tool. We can use it to make our relationships better, or we can use it to make our relationships worse, and we have to decide how we're going to use it. Without silence and rest, rich communication cannot exist. Wow. If we're not getting enough rest, we're extremely tired, we're exhausted, we're going to be more emotional, which means we're going to be more upset and things are going to set us off that wouldn't normally set us off. And then that's going to be a domino effect in our lives and among our relationships in a negative way. So rest becomes super important. And then silence, the silence to know what's going on in our interior world, the silence to connect with God, to not just pray, but to listen, to the gentle nudgings. God doesn't push, God guides, God nudges. You'll have these kind of, this is what I believe, you have these kind of gentle things that you hear and you feel, and maybe you ignore them, but you start hearing them finally, and you go, oh, I think God's been trying to tell me that for a while, So without those two things, you can't have rich communication. You can't have rich, deep relationships. It'll all be superficial and shallow. Because number one, we're not going to have time to think about it. We're not going to have time to know who we are apart from other people. And then we're not going to have time to hear what God has to say to us. And then we're going to be so tired that we're upset all the time. And that's not going to help our communication because we're probably going to be yelling, and that's not going to be rich, right? the opposite of rich. Employ technology wisely. Do not be dominated by it. So media can be used for good, media can be used for bad. Media can be used to draw us closer, media can be used to divide us. And we have technology, and I think we're really glad to have it. I'm using a lot of it today, but we're glad to be connected and to have media and to have this technology, which is only growing more rapidly. I can't even fathom what's happening in our technological world right now with artificial intelligence, generative artificial intelligence, and crypto stuff that is above my head. But we have to use it wisely and not be dominated by it. Number one, it could all be taken away tomorrow. We need to know how to communicate in person and to work together in ways that, despite the technology, we need the soft skills. And we need to use the technology to do good in the world, to help people. Those are the things that make us joyful, to help other people. We don't need to be using it in a way that harms people because, number one, that's not wise, because that will have a karmic payback either in this life or whatever, Yeah, I believe in past lives. I do. Okay. I don't know how you feel about that, but I do. And so you can build up this karma that you pay in this life or maybe in your next life or whatever. Um, but, and so to be dominated by technology makes me think about young people playing video games all day and then maybe getting in a bad mood. And they don't know why they're in a bad mood, but it's because they've been playing video games all day. And so just not being dominated by it, not being so addicted to it that we can't put it down. I swear, I pick my phone up every minute. I put it down and I'm like, a question will pop in my mind and I've got to Google it, and I pick it up and then, or somebody texts me and I pick it up. And so, and that brings anxiety, just naturally brings anxiety. To be that connected to a digital device is not okay. Yeah. Challenge. Learn how to talk to each other, not just generate and consume information. And I do think I can tell this with the young people that I work with, that they feel that content creation is super important in the business world. And they know how to do it well to engage audiences. And sometimes that stuff is silly, but that's how they engage audiences. And so it is almost like we are very focused on creating content that engages audiences, that will be consumed by audiences, which is just information. And I think Pope Francis was exactly right. And this was in 2015. He was exactly right to say, don't just generate and consume this information. Communicate on a level where you're listening and you're feeling and you're speaking with feelings, not overly emotional. I'm not saying that, but just having an actual relating and identifying and maybe storytelling, but having it in a way that creates us to have better relationships and to be drawn closer instead of just this information highway that we're all on, we never exit off of. We need to exit off of and go to the Waffle House together and have lunch or breakfast or whatever. Information is important, but it's not enough. And so I think of information as being facts and news, and education sometimes is full of information. And I think he's just saying, that's all left brain, that's all logic, that's all analysis and details and things, and it's great. We need it to survive. But we also need our right brain. We need to be intuitive, and we need to be emotionally intelligent, and we need to be creative and receptive in the more, the Holy Mother sort of way of being receptive. Acceptance, I think, comes through that receptive mind frame. Okay. Things get simplified, and then views are pitted against each other. He was saying this a decade ago. Oh, yeah. And I think he said it this year as well. Maybe not on a World Communications Day, but I definitely heard him say it, that we, in the media, in social media, especially the way that we use it, we overly simplify views. We kind of make them black or white because they're so extreme. Black or white, or whatever. It's hot, it's cold. It's left, it's right. It's a very simplified view of things. He's saying that things are more nuanced. They're more complex. Views are not that simple. And lately, what I've been experiencing is I have a belief about something, and I think my belief is true. But when I listen to somebody else's belief, I can make that make sense too. And then that means we're both right. And then if we're both right, then how can we make this work? Only through the middle way, not through getting rid. You're never going to get rid of this or that, really. If something's valid, if it's truly valid and it's truly going to help people, then the way to solve the problem is to find that middle way and get away from the extreme versions of things where our views are pitted against each other. And to make sure in our media, I mean, it's one thing if something is happening that's really, really, that's causing destruction, death and destruction, then we need to stand up against those things. But sometimes our views just get pitted against each other because that's how the algorithm helps whoever's in charge of the algorithm make money. And if we're serving money, even through our consumption of the media, then we're not serving God. And so when we allow, I think probably just when you're consuming media, if you think something's being overly simplified, just know that's being used to pit you against somebody or somebody against you. People are invited to take sides, not the whole. In our media, sometimes, we're invited to look at this extreme view, not to see the whole picture. In fact, we're not even trying to be whole as citizens of a country, which is really sad and not a recipe for success or prosperity or abundance or peace or any of those things. We're not being invited to see that there is a way for humanity to be whole, or for a country, citizens to be whole, or a world to be whole, or a planet to be whole. We're not being invited to see that picture at all. We're being invited to take sides. Are you on that team? Are you on this team? And that's all about winning and losing, which is all about competition, which is not the answer to joy or human flourishing. It's just not. I don't think Jesus came to teach us how to compete with one another. Jesus came to teach us how to see the whole. And if we're not seeing the whole, and we're not being invited to see the whole, and we're not inviting other people to see the whole picture of how we are all a part of humanity, then we're not preaching or teaching the good news of the Gospels. So we must think about this. We must believe in health, in holistic healing and wholeness of our society and of the world. We must believe that that's possible. Family should be a communicating community. Family is a community. Pope Francis says family should be a communicating community, a community that communicates well and with each other. And I don't even know. I agree, first of all, but I was thinking about workplace. Workplaces also should be communicating communities, but a lot of the communication that I hear on the workplace is somebody talking bad about somebody else. So that's a communication that is inviting us to take sides, which means it's inviting us to divide, to be divided. It's not inviting us to commune with one another. And so communication and community should both be about communing with one another. And if we're not, then we don't have either of those. I would dare say if we're not communicating, we are not a community. We may be in the same location. My office may be next to your office, but we may not be communing with one another. And therefore, we're just neighbors, not neighborly, right? We're neighbors in a you're next door to me sort of way, but not necessarily in a we're being friendly neighbors and working to help one another sort of way. The family equals receiving love and returning that love, to love and be loved. Pope Francis said that. Viscott said that. Other people have said that the whole purpose of being here is to love and be loved. And so the family should be a place where you're receiving love and then returning that love. And that love itself is a form of communication. Love, and sometimes that word gets polluted, to mean something else that's more obsessive and controlling and possessive. That's not love. Love is wanting what's best for the other person. Love is wanting God's will for yourself and others, because you know that God's will is the best thing for you here on earth. And so that is love, supporting godly dreams, supporting creativity, supporting joyful things. All of that is how we give and receive love. Accepting the support of others about your dreams, even if you don't feel worthy, even if you weren't conditioned to feel worthy. Maybe the complex you need to heal is that you can't receive love. That's a tough one. Only love can heal that. But if you can't receive it, how do you get that love that you need to heal that complex? It's very complex, isn't it? Yeah, but only love can heal that. Crying your tears, having insight, catharsis. Relating means we are bound together. Many voices, each unique. Each of us has a unique voice. And whatever our community is, whether it's humanity, which is the largest, or there's probably one above that, nature or something, and then humanity, and then maybe it's within our countries or within our local communities or within our families. To relate means that we're bonding, which means we are bound, not in a abusive way, but just in a human family sort of way, and that we relate to one another, that we are listening and hearing. And yes, there are many voices, but as Paul Celepek says, it seems like I mention this every time. Every villager has the same stories and the same struggles, and we're all unique in how we express those and experience those, but archetypically, these many voices are few, Even though we're all unique, we all have a different fingerprint, a different DNA strand. But to relate means hearing those many unique voices in an effort to be together to bring that closeness. And if we're dividing, then we're certainly not relating. Families are a resource for society, not a problem. And I know that some feel that the family's being attacked. I don't see that personally as much as others do. But I do agree that, like we mentioned earlier, from Pope Francis's instruction, that learning how to communicate in a healthy way within the family unit is really the only way. And whether your family is something you were born into or created, the people around you are the ones that will help us communicate. And if we're doing that in a healthy way, it radiates into society and will have a large effect on society. But unfortunately, when your family's having to worry about bombs or starving or not having water, not having clean water or shelter, it's communication becomes important for survival, but it's a little bit of the least of your worries, right? And so I think we need to focus more on making and facilitating a world where people have their basic needs met, so that then they can begin to think about things like communicating and relating on a higher plane of we're on the Maslow scale. When if we can get past survival needs and safety needs, then we can finally get up to the self-esteem and relating, and then we reach our way up to more altruistic things to think about, and morality and all of that. And so, and I've often said it goes backwards. We really need to think about God first and find our purpose, and then let that radiate downward, because it will help us with our relationships, which will help us with our self-esteem, it'll help us with our self-esteem, which will help us with our relationships, which will help us with our safety and survival. And I mean, it can go the other direction. Anyway, all right. Well, thank you so much, and look forward to seeing you next time.